This is the new ROG Ally X gaming handheld, and regulars of the channel are probably thinking, didn't you already do a video on this? And the answer is yes, but also no, because that video was an early hands-on look at a pre-release version of the device that I could game on and check out all the changes and upgrades, but I wasn't able to do any performance testing. But this is the polished, finalized version, which means today I can finally put it through its paces in a bunch of games and see how it performs. So let's do this. Most of you watching this are probably here because you're looking to get a handheld device for gaming, or you have the first ROG Ally and want to see how this compares to the original. I tested the original Ally last year, and when I checked out the pre-release Ally X a few weeks ago, I was very impressed with the changes they've made. The headline upgrade was the fact that the Ally X now packed an 80 watt-hour battery, which is double the size of the previous generation. But the kicker is that they've managed to do this without dramatically increasing the weight of the device, with the Ally X just 11% heavier than the older model and 4.5mm thicker. The bigger battery, of course, allows for more playtime, with ROG saying you can get almost 3 hours of gaming in on a single charge, and of course it also means you can run it in higher performance modes for longer to get a better gaming experience. Along with increased battery capacity is better charging speeds, with the Ally X supporting up to 100 watts compared to the 65 watts of the original. However, when you come to unboxing the Ally X, you will find the same 65 watt charger as the original. Fortunately, I have here ROG's 140 watt charger to test out the faster charging speeds a little later on. Now, just to recap some of the other design changes, the first thing to note is that the Ally X is now black rather than the white of the old model. This is one change that I personally wasn't a fan of, purely because I'm a sucker for the white tech and setup aesthetic, as you can tell from the rest of my studio. For most people, this will be a good thing, as white tech does have a tendency to get dirty and marked up fairly easily, so by switching to the black, this will no longer be an issue. There were also a bunch of changes to the ergonomics of the device to improve the overall playing experience. The grips have been remodeled to sit more naturally and comfortably in the hands like a controller would. The locations of the controls have also been slightly modified to make it easier to switch between, and the triggers also have a new shape to make activation a little easier. The D-pad has been upgraded with better 8-directional input for greater accuracy in movement and to help in certain game types. And finally, the joysticks have also had an upgrade to make them much more durable and to improve the spring stiffness to feel much more like they would on a controller. They did decide not to upgrade to Hall effect joysticks on the Ally X, which is definitely a shame and something I know a few people in the comments were disappointed about on my previous showcase video. The cooling has also had a complete overhaul with anti-gravity heat pipes, slimmer fans and redesigned fan shrouds, which improve airflow by up to 24% and not only helps to cool components, but also the touchscreen by up to 6 degrees Celsius. And of course, better temperatures means better performance. Taking a quick look at the overall specs before we test out some games, the Ally X packs the same AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor as the original Ally, but has an increased 24GB of LPDDR5 7500 RAM compared to the 16GB of LPDDR5 6400 it previously had. And this allows the Ally X to allocate faster memory to the graphics and push performance further. It also has a 1TB M.2 2280 NVMe SSD, replacing the 512GB M.2 2230 SSD, so there's more space for games and also better upgradability of your storage if that's what you're planning to do. The screen is the same 7-inch Full HD 1080p 120Hz touch panel, and I was certainly hoping for an OLED version myself, but we may see that in the future if they bring out an Ally 2. So overall, you would expect the Ally X to certainly push gaming performance further and get some better results than the original Ally. So now let's put the theory to the test and try out a bunch of games to see how they perform. I've downloaded a few different types of games such as Star Wars Outlaws, Cyberpunk, Forza Horizon, Fortnite and Call of Duty to see how they run on this device. I'll also try each game in different modes and settings to see what kind of numbers I can get from it. Feel free to let me know any games you'd like to see me test on here, and I may put out short form videos in the future testing some more. The first game I'm going to test is one of my favourite racing games, Forza Horizon 5. And for the purposes of the test, I'm going to run at both low and high graphics settings to see what kind of performance I can get from each. First of all, after turning all of the graphics down to low settings, as you can see, I was able to get around an average of 90 to 95 FPS, which is a noticeable increase over the original. I did also have AMD FSR turned on and the device was running in performance mode. For reference, when turning this to turbo mode, I got around 100 to 110 FPS, sometimes even 120. Now, switching all of the graphics settings to their maximum, the game crashed. So instead, switching them to Ultra and still running AMD FSR, putting the Ally in performance mode, I was now getting a more modest 35 to 45 FPS. And switching to Turbo mode, I was able to manage around 50 FPS. Of course, the game looks so much better with these settings turned up, so it's a trade-off for whether you want the best FPS or the best looking experience. Next up is the newest game on the list, which dropped yesterday, Star Wars Outlaws. I was fortunate enough to get this early, shout out to Ubisoft for that, but how does it perform on the Ally X? With AMD FSR on and settings turned down, as you can see, I'm getting around high 30s to low 40s in performance mode, and bumping that up to turbo, I was able to get around 50 FPS. Turning all the graphics settings up, in performance mode, surprisingly I was still able to get 30 FPS, and in turbo mode I averaged around low to mid 30s. So the difference from low to ultra settings wasn't actually very much, so I feel like there's still some optimizing to be done here. The next game I tested was Cyberpunk 2077, and again I started by turning all of the graphics settings down to the minimum, and for the sake of not repeating myself, I am running AMD FSR frame generation for all of these tests if the game supports it. In performance mode with the graphics turned down, I was averaging around 45 FPS, and in turbo mode this stayed consistent around 45 to 50 FPS. Turning up all of the graphics settings to Ultra, the Ally X suffered and was only able to get around 15 FPS in performance mode and 20 FPS in turbo mode. So while this can be a really graphically stunning game, it may be best to keep those settings down a bit in order to be playable. Up next, and just to get it out of the way because I hate this game, it's Fortnite. You know the drill by now, turning all the settings down to minimum and jumping into a game, I was averaging around mid to high 60s in performance mode, which then jumped up to around 80 to 90 FPS in turbo mode. Then switching all the settings up to maximum, I was now getting 25 to 27 FPS in performance mode and 35 in turbo mode. But of course, no matter what numbers I was getting, I still suck at the game and it's still terrible, so let's move on. Now, you may have noticed that I've turned everything orange, and that's because the next game we're going to test is Call of Duty. And it just so happens that the Black Ops 6 beta has just landed. So jumping into a game on all low settings, in performance mode the Ally X managed to get around the low to mid 60s, and then switching up to turbo mode boosted it to around the low to mid 80s. I don't know how many people play games like COD on max graphics, but with the settings turned up I was getting around 50 FPS in performance mode and mid to high 50s in turbo, so not bad going at all. The next game I tested is one of my personal favourite games, Horizon Forbidden West. But this one went pretty badly. With all of the settings turned down, the game looked awful and still only ran between 30 to 40 on performance mode and mid to high 30s on turbo. But confusingly, turning the settings up to max, the game continued to look dreadful and ran in the mid to high 20s in performance and mid to low 30s in turbo. Something definitely seemed off with this, so I don't know how accurate the result is. Even the early engineering sample I checked out a couple of months ago looked way better and ran smoother, so definitely something needs tweaking on this one. Moving on though, and for those of you still playing older games, and I hate calling this an older game, but next up it's good old Grand Theft Auto 5. With all the settings on low, I was getting around a strong 65 to 70 FPS in performance and slightly higher in turbo mode at 70 to 75 FPS. Then after turning all the settings to max and waiting for the game to reboot, I was getting a more modest 30 to 35 FPS in performance mode and 35 to 40 in turbo. This game still holds up superbly well, and while I'm super excited for GTA 6, this will always be an epic game. So overall, a bit of a mixed bag, but the majority of games had greater performance on the Ally X than the original. There is definitely some playing around and tweaking of the settings needed on here for me to really get the best out of it in games like Cyberpunk and Horizon Forbidden West. But aside from that, things were running nicely, and the raft of chassis and ergonomic upgrades made this newer model really make the playing experience much nicer all round than the original. Now, going back to that bigger battery in the Ally X that we mentioned earlier, while testing all of this out, I was able to actually get a good 3 hours of gaming in, sometimes even more, before needing to hook the device up to the charger, which was pleasantly surprising. And this also gave me the opportunity to test out that new fast charging feature using the 140 watt charging brick that Asus sent over. As you can see, the Ally X was on 15% at 3 PM, and whilst delivering 100 watts of charging power to the device, I was able to charge from 15% to 57% in about 25 minutes. So not only is it great to see the Ally X getting much better battery life than the original Ally, but also charging back up even faster so you can spend more time gaming and less time charging. So is the Ally X worth picking up? Well, with the improvements made to the gaming performance and ergonomics of the device, it's certainly a contender for best gaming handheld on the market. And if you're looking for your first gaming handheld, I would fully recommend picking one of these up. It does come with a hefty price tag at £799, but honestly, for the fact that this is essentially a full gaming PC that you can carry in your hand with the ease and comfort of a controller, if you have the funds, it is definitely worth it. For those of you who already have the original Ally, while the upgrades are definitely noticeable and the Ally X has better gaming performance, better battery, faster charging, much more comfortable to hold and use, it's still probably not going to be worth the switch up because the original Ally is a great device. But let me know in the comments, do you have an Ally and are looking to upgrade, or are you just looking for your first handheld? And what did you think of the Ally X? And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to hit that thumbs up so that we can push this out to more tech and gaming fans like you. If you want to see more content like this, then feel free to sub to the channel and I'll be back with another video next week. See you later.